Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Resource Gatherer. I'm your host, Justin. With me is my co-host, Cody. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that we have talked about previously on the show. In spite of our new recent drop of our MTG-Kingdoms episode that dropped earlier this week, we're going to be talking about some strategies for how we build our decks and a little bit more in-depth on Magic. As always, go ahead and check out our other content. Dice Age is our D&D content, which is going to be like our D&D campaign, as well as check out MTG-Kingdoms. We're going to be making content for that once a month here on our YouTube channel. For anyone who's listening on the podcast, you can check out our YouTube channel, which is Resource Gatherer. It should be the one that has the same logo as the logo on our YouTube links. On that note, we're going to go and start this week's episode of Resource Gatherer. What do you think is the most important thing when building a deck for the MTG-Kingdoms show when it comes to strategy?
So it's similar to how Commander's built, but you also have to take in consideration what role you might be. You know, whether you're the king, the bandit, the knight, you know, the usurper, the wild card, the joker. You have to build a deck that's able to shift its dynamic just a little bit, you know, so you can't just like plan on being the knight, and then when you're not the knight, your whole deck pretty much is just going to sit there. The other problem but the other strategy you have to consider is like your resilience. So like you need to make sure you still have good card draw, as we saw in mine.
Again, no spoilers for the episode.
But like I never had the issue of not having, you know, more than one card in hand. You know, because when you're top decking, even in regular Commander, that's a problem. When you're top decking in Kingdoms, there's an extra person, you got to wait for it to go around. So it's even more detrimental if you are, you know, drawing dead into your turn. So that's one issue. The other one is like you can't miss land base. You can't miss your land drop. So you have to make sure that your mana curve is on correct. You know, if you're playing green, you can ramp. If you're playing white, you know, and white actually has one of the best cards for Kingdoms, and that's Smothering Tithe, because it triggers that extra time, assuming nobody pays for it, because it never seems like anybody wants to pay for that card.
I pay for it.
Well, guess because you're smart.
But yeah, so when it comes to strategies for our show, and so a component for those of you who haven't watched, how it works for our show is each of us are given a role card. So it's similar to Werewolf or other role-playing games. We talked about it on the episodes before, but just in case you haven't heard it. And essentially how it works is the strategy is everyone's going to take down a face-down role card before the game starts, after they chosen their decks. And the reason we do that is so you can't change your deck after you look at your card and go, oh, I have a deck that would work way better for this strategy here.
Exactly.
Etc. And this is what we do even at our local game stores when we're not playing on air. Obviously for on air, we check all the deck lists to make sure that they follow the rules and regulations, so everyone's starting at a base 0. And the reason why we want everyone to be at the same power level is so the games run consistently. It's not going to be like a runaway game where one person just completely takes off and you're like, oh my gosh, wow, that dude really like jumped. Sometimes it happens. I mean, we've seen it. We recorded 2 episodes for Kingdoms initially. The first episode never got released because it was just a complete wash. So Game 2 was the one that we released for the show. And that one is so intricate and interesting that we're like, this is now episode 1. And that's how we're going to perceive doing Kingdoms and games in general, is we're going to focus on it being interesting and fun with a lot of swinging and changes, because that's really what we focused on when we created the card game.
Because we want to be entertaining for you guys as well as for us, because we've all played games where we're sitting there going like, oh my gosh, is this over yet? Like,
I mean, and sometimes somebody's going to feel that way regardless. I mean, you know, without giving spoilers, people obviously, as the game progresses, people get knocked out. And you do have time where you're like sitting there and you're like, but on the flip side, the game is so interesting that even when you do potentially get knocked out of a game, you can still watch and enjoy it and go, wow, this is crazy. I never would have seen this happen the way that it happens.
And in theory, you can still win.
Exactly. And that's really what's cool about Kingdoms 2 is because of the hidden roles. Regardless of what your role was, you have the opportunity to potentially win, not only by accomplishing your role, but because we added in the Joker the way that we did, someone can kill you. And regardless of what your role is, let's say that your role was like you were a bandit and you had no way of getting through on the king. But let's say whoever the Joker was can, because they have an unblockable creature that's their, you know, commander or something. They kill you. You are now on their team. Well, actually, no. Take that back, actually.
The
Sorry.
other way.
It would be if the usurper killed you, because the Joker kills you, then you're out of the game.
Yeah.
So the Joker's the only card that if you're out of the game, you're out of the game. Sorry,
Yeah.
sucks. But
that goes in the randomness of if you get, what cards you pull and stuff like that. Because the other thing that, when building it, you want to keep the strategy, and like group slug is not a strategy you want to go with, like a Nekuzar deck, like however it is super effective, but you need to strategically take out your opponents, because if you are that bandit, you need another bandit to help you out, or if you are the knight, you want to take somebody out and to reveal your card. Different things like that. But if you wipe everyone out at the same time, one, that's really not fun to watch, but two, you don't get that advantage of like getting another roll card or different things like that.
Yeah, so the main thing that we created for the show was when you knock out a player, if you're one of the face down roll cards, you get an advantage. So if you're the knight, you get to reveal your roll cards, so the king actually knows, hey, you are in fact the knight. Now you have a teammate face up, face up. All the other roll cards, the advantage of having that is if you kill another player, ideally, if you're any of the other 3 roll cards, you're trying to kill the knight. And the reason why you do that, so it's not 2v3, it's you and potentially 2v2 or 2v1 or et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So like the game can change and transition. So like for me, if I'm any roll card besides the knight, my goal is to kill the knight first.
Yeah.
That is like just roll 1. If I'm not the king, I'm not the knight, I'm killing the knight.
Yeah.
But the problem is in traditional kingdoms, what happens, and this is the reason why we started playing this game this way, you'll sit at a table. Let's say you have 5 players, and a lot of people like to play combo decks. You sit there, and a lot of them, what they're going to do is they're going to say, I'm the knight, I'm the knight, I'm the knight, combo, win, kill everybody, but
not the knight.
But not the knight. And then the thing is that their strategy for playing the deck doesn't work for kingdoms, and they actually end up losing the game because they were like, say, not the assassin. As long as they weren't the assassin, if everyone dies at the same time, including the king, if everyone dies except the king last, the bandit wins.
Yes.
So if they weren't the bandit and it just becomes a heads up with just them two, they could. It's weird. Rulings are really weird when it comes to everyone dying at the same time, which is why we wanted that to be taken out of the game. So like one of the strategies that we try to. We're not saying strongly move against, but like mill is a hard strategy for how we would use these rules because
mill's hard in a regular game of Commander, let alone adding that extra person and having to mill that many more people, because a lot of mill cards target the good mill cards target. Like Ruin Crab, everyone has to mill 3. Well, 3 out of 99 is really not that much, but. And typically you're not in the colors that you're dropping multiple lands per turn and different things like that for mill decks. Mill decks are typically Dimir.
So the issue with mill, and this was kind of what we kind of learned this early on when we were talking about it. It's the same issue we ran into with Infect. If you kill someone with mill, how do you bring that player back to join your team if you kill them? Mm-hmm. And the problem is you can't, because if their deck is milled, they lose the game. They don't have any cards, so even if you brought them back on your team, they still don't have any cards, thus losing again. With Infect, if they come back, they still have 10 Infect.
And then they die.
So it's like, it's not that we're saying that these things aren't playable on the show. You could play them.
They're just not optimal
but they're not,
show.
They're
not optimal, but...
They're not showing the specific rules that we were trying to create for the show.
It's more of the role-playing as opposed to the... deck style?
I guess that's really what it comes down to. Like the main thing is we were just trying to build an intricate way to play Commander with 5 people that's more interesting than just playing like, if you're like, hey, we're tired of playing all of our combo decks every week, let's try something a little different. Let's all play a little bit lower power. Here's a game that we can play that's a balanced game that focuses on everyone being around the same power level, and it's rules and regulations that are, anyone can use out there to be like, oh, hey, here's like a fun, balanced system that works. It's not perfect.
Yeah.
Nothing's perfect, but it limits a lot of the problems that you're going to find. So, for example, because we have no free spells, in lower power games, a game where you get to cascade, like cascade decks, would be a lot stronger in a lower profile game.
Oh, absolutely.
Versus, like, say, a game where, like, I don't know, your main strategy is just pumping out a bunch of little dudes, but you're not playing aristocrats. Like if you're just playing like a regular straight up mono white tokens deck just to beat face, and you don't have haste, you're very, very easily destroyed from a board wipe or something, right? But like if you have a deck that doesn't need people to interact with it to win, those strategies are really, really strong and really difficult to deal with, which is why aristocrats is great in higher tier Magic, but it can be really problematic if you're trying to play like a lower power game where everyone's just swinging and punching face. It's also, a lot of the combo decks aren't always as interesting to watch people pilot. Granted, sometimes the pilot and how they get there is really unique and interesting, and I've seen games where I'm like, wow, that was a way different way that I would have done it. But
yeah, like when there's like a 5-card like infinite combo or something like that, like, you know, you gotta, you know, draw all the pieces,
or you tutor for them.
Yeah, but I mean, like the fact that if I don't have all 5 of these cards out, like I don't get this infinite combo. That's interesting to watch. Dramatic Reversal and Ice Crown Scepter go off. Like, okay, we've all seen it a billion times. It's super old, and then they draw their deck, or they pump Walking Ballista to 1,000,000 and then explode the board. Like,
yeah, you just play Heliod and Walking Ballista and just and win.
It gets boring, you know. Like we want to watch fun combos because, like, for me especially, like when I first started playing Magic, like it was all about turning your card sideways and smacking face. It wasn't about drawing your deck and doing all this other stuff. Like that was the main strategy, and it's fun and it's exciting because, like, in your mind, like you're imagining like this tribe of elves fighting this, you know, horde of dragons, you know, and sometimes the elves win, sometimes the dragons win. Like anything is possible, or different things like that. And with Kingdoms, it's essentially like the same thing. Like, you know, we're having this epic battle, you know, is the king going to win, or, you know?
Yeah, I think of it like the Lord of the Rings, the army of five, the battle of five armies.
Yeah.
Yeah, where they had the, you know, essentially that's really what Kingdoms was sort of designed to be. It's a game focusing on the concepts of just large form battles between these larger armies and sort of seeing who can eventually punch each other in the face the hardest. But I do think that there's other ways that you can play. And that's not saying that we're limiting exclusively to combat-focused decks. It's just that's the way that I think this strategy works the best. Mm-hmm. The other thing, too, is when it comes to deck building, you can't just put, like, creatures in, right? Unless you're playing elves. Sorry. Unless you're playing elves, then, yeah, if you're playing elves, you know what? Just play elves. You will win. Literally 36 lands, elves, game over.
You don't need 36 lands because half of them are dorks anyway.
But you need to have your consistent turn 1 land so that way you can play your turn 1.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so
and that's the other reason why we put the no spell or the free spell, you know, ruling in there, because how many times have you played a game and you see somebody go, okay, turn 1, I'm going to play Mana Crypt. Then I'm going to tap that for an Arcane Signet. Then I'm going to play an Island. And then I'm going to tap that for a Soul Ring. I'm going to put a Ristic Study out. Yeah. And then they're going to draw their hand back in 2 seconds.
And that's the reason why. So that was so the no free spells rule was to hopefully de-incentivize people from wanting to play CDH staples. Mm-hmm. Because most of the CDH staples are free, right?
And they cost us bunch of money.
So because of that, between the cost restriction and the 0 mana rule, those things were implemented specifically to keep CDH staples out of the game. And the reason why is because you might be able to, if you play a cheap enough deck, anyone can do it, right? If you're playing mono blue artifacts, you could just make your budget a Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, and Ice Crown Scepter, Dramatic Reversal, and Urza. And just a bunch of counter spells and like a bunch of like really, really expensive CMC, but really, really cheap cost artifacts.
Yep.
And that could be your entire deck. And you can get into our strategy of the under 250 budget. I've seen people break the game before. Mm-hmm. When we had it as a different show. Because the 250 budget wasn't restrictive enough to keep those type of people who are always going to try to optimize the game, this makes it a little bit more fair. And again, people are going to break the game. Unfortunately, I don't see every single line that you have in your head if you plan to walk into the game to break it.
Yeah.
But if you show up on the show, you're a cast member, you're looking to have a great time, play some fun games with some fun people, mm-hmm. and really just kill like 2 or 3 hours playing Magic. That's what we're trying to do. This isn't going to be like your traditional 1 hour content where you get one game in. It's very quick. We're looking for twists, turns, excitement, and politics. Really, like I think the biggest problem that I think a lot of people have walked away from in the later years in Magic, because combo decks are so prevalent, it's hard to make a deal and trust people anymore, right?
Yeah.
I have so much trust issues now when I play decks where I'm like, hey man, you want to make a deal where like you don't attack me this turn because you have like that really big creature, and they'll go like, yeah man, I'll make that deal with you, and I go cool. Well, now, and hypothetically in this situation, I'm the villain. It gets back to me, cool, you just said you weren't going to attack me this turn. I'm going to combo out and win.
Exactly.
And
I didn't attack you, but I comboed. Like
because you could have killed me last turn and chose not to because we made some weird agreement where I got all the benefit and you didn't get anything. But then when it got back to my turn, I was able to win because you didn't do that. And so oftentimes, because of that trust issue, that 1 or 2 games, like Cody and I talked about PTSD from playing Magic the Gathering in one of our previous episodes, you can't create deals in situations anymore. And the other problem is you watch these like high level channel deals that happen and you see how they get screwed over from these deals. Mm-hmm. And so nobody wants to talk tabletop politics anymore because they're like, well, man, this deal, I don't want to take any deals because it just, I want to just, if I do, then I'm screwing myself over. Sometimes, and hypothetically sometimes, deals don't always screw you over, and you have to think about like what is best for everyone at the table, even if you're like, hypothetically, you're the knight, right? Mm-hmm. If you see someone who, if you're the knight, because your knight is, you're protecting your king, you have a known role. Your role isn't to kill the king. Your role is, and you see somebody who's going to pop off and they're going to do something crazy. You're like, okay, they're a known enemy to the king. I know what my role is. I need to take them out. But someone else goes, hey, don't take them out here because I can take them out on my turn, even though I know you're probably a knight or some other face down role. I don't know what your role is. I'll take care of them so that way you can deal with the other person who's another threat. Or et cetera, et cetera. And it's like that's what's important about Magic is you always have to be thinking about how do I use table negotiations in order to deal with large table threats. Because if one dude's just running away with the game, especially even if they're the king, unless you're the knight, everyone else at the table needs to make that agreement and be like, listen, they have to go. We have to stop this. And if you don't, even if you are hypothetically, unless you're the knight, you don't stop them, even if you're like, well, I'm the assassin and I plan on taking their role, you'll never get there.
Yeah.
And I think that was the biggest problem we ran into when we played a lot of early games of Kingdoms. A lot of people are afraid to attack the king. And that's fair. You don't want to give up your role card too early.
Yeah, but you're not going to turn one, blitz out and attack the king.
Some people do.
No, because
if you're playing goblins and your whole strategy is I have to win early or die.
Early, yeah. Turn 3, sure, you can start swinging. Like most of the time for me, like my typical strategy is like I want to build up at least a little bit of a board state because if
then
I'm
you alpha strike, yeah.
Well, not so much alpha strike, but like I'm okay with having a board like even just a little board, like 3 lands, maybe a creature or 2, maybe an artifact, and I hit the king. Like okay, like anybody else out there that wants to help me out here, like that's cool. Like they can go along with it, but
sometimes I just blitz the king.
Yeah, I mean,
because like hypothetically, if you're a face down roll card, if you're the bandit or the usurper, and statistically speaking, if you don't do anything and you wait those 3 to 4 turns, the king also has 3 to 4 turns. Their knight has 3 to 4 turns to develop. If you're early and you have the early ramp, let's say you get like the turn 1 soul ring into like an arcane signet or whatever you're going to do, which is still really crazy, but like that's probably like the max level you're going to get on our show, right?
But honestly, it's not as good as people think it is. Like unless it's like you're going to be casting your commander, turn 1 land in the soul ring and the arcane signet, that's 3 cards out of your hand.
Which is why when we're talking about deck building strategies, when it comes to Kingdoms, there's a couple elements that I always tell people to think about, and this just goes back to like building decks in general, right? Mm-hmm. The first thing, we talked about this before, is lands. I have a consistent number basis that I think about for each type of deck that I'm running. So if I'm running like really, really low to the ground creatures, like let's say goblins, like I have a mono red Sabira deck, rogues, 33 to 34 lands is probably what I'm running. Mm-hmm. But I'm making up that with rocks. Like I need a bunch of, 'cause especially in red and blue, you need rocks to be able to jump in.
You need more rocks than you do lands because you don't. That's your only way of ramping. So, like, in all honesty,
yeah. So it's usually like I'm running probably like 12 rocks. And again, usually how I try to play it is we don't play with anything less than 1, but I try to get all my 2-drop CMC rocks in.
like Felwar Stone,
Felwar thoughts. Yeah. So like I do have a strategy. So even when I'm like playing on the 250 optimized budget, I'm always like, okay, what are my 2-cost rocks that I can play on the deck? Sometimes I'll play a third one. Now, it depends on how many colors I'm running. If I'm running 3 or more, I will run a 3-color rock, but the one that I want to run is the one that's going to make all of my lands.
Chromatic Lantern.
Yes, every color. Chromatic Lantern. Probably one of the most goated rocks in existence because it changes your complete way of how you play the game.
And for 3 mana, like, if that was a 4 mana rock, like, it would be argued if it was good or not.
I think it would be good in every deck that isn't running green. If it was 4, it would still be good. It wouldn't be great.
Yes.
And the reason it's great is because it's 3. So even if you're running green, it's still good enough to where it's like, okay, do I play a mana rock here or do I cultivate? Cultivate, I get an addition. You get one in hand, one on the battlefild. So both ways you get 1 additional mana that turn. Granted, rocks are way easier to get rid of, which is why removal is important. So when you get past your land base, right? So 34 to 35. So my range is generally between 36, 37, 38 on the high end if you're playing landfall. So landfall deck is probably at max 38, low end's 34, between that range for lands, and then you have to decide what your colors are and how many you're running. So even if you're running 5 colors, the other thing that I always tell people, I would much rather run a basic than a tap land.
Yes, 100%.
I think that was one of the things that, like, consistently...
a lot of new players, they're like, well, I want to be able to hit, like, both red and green or both black and white, but when you're late game and you need that extra mana source and you draw a tap land, well, you're still down a turn then.
Exactly, and that's why when you look at people who generally win games of Magic, the people who have more consistent wins, like Cody said, it comes down to people who are consistently getting more lands or ramp, more card draw, and getting to their win cons the fastest, right? So those are
that card draw into your win conditions.
Or tutors or any of the other ways that you can get to your win con. Because your win con might just be your commander. Your win con might be like, hey, I'm playing a Voltron deck. My commander is my win con. I just need to keep swinging, and I'm eventually going to get there.
Yep.
So in that strategy, right, it might be like I'm running a bunch of equipment or I'm bunching a bunch of auras or whatever that strategy is, which is why I was just saying whatever your win con is.
Yeah.
But so 34 to between 36 lands. From there, it's your ramp package. Your ramp package, I generally go with, so like this is like my cookie cutter, like how I build a deck, right? It's going to change based off what deck you're playing. Some decks will have more, some decks will have less.
And also your color restrictions because some colors just are not good at things that other, like blue is by far the best card draw engine.
But blue doesn't give you ramp.
Exactly.
Which is why blue, so for example, when I'm on a blue deck, I'm going to run between 15 and like 18 ramps, like rocks. And the hard part is blue doesn't have a lot of colored rocks at that 2 or less mark that you're going to hit when you're hitting that many.
Yeah, you're playing like Basalt Monolith, you're playing Grim Monolith, you're playing...
That's if you're playing high tier. Now what you do if you're playing low tier is that's where you pull out your 3-drop rock that makes all of your lands colors because it's colored mana. So the biggest thing is anything, if I'm running 3 or 4 of, rather than getting colorless in a monocolor deck, I'm trying to make sure that whatever I'm hitting is going to get me the color. So like the signets that come in tapped but give you a color, I still think are better than a Thought Vessel. And the reason why is because Thought Vessel comes in with colorless mana versus colored. When you're playing those monocolored decks, you're not always going to really have to worry about getting your mana base, especially if you're playing like hypothetically artifacts, right? I don't need to worry about how many colorless I have. I just need to know how many colors I need in order to hit my counter spells, hit my whatever, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing with mono red. Mono red, if you aren't hitting consistent red mana bases, you're going to be slow on the draw.
And one of the big things, like when you are building your deck and stuff like that, is count your blips. You know, how many red blips do I have? How many black blips do I have? Because that will also base it upon like what type of rocks do I need to have? Do I need stuff that produces color, or can I get away with a few extra colorless ones because they are more cost effective? Whether like it's 2 CMC versus a 3 CMC.
Oh yeah, for sure, yeah.
Different things like that. Like because I have my mono blue artifact deck. A lot of it's colorless, so I get away with playing Thought Vessel and other things like that.
And I'm not saying don't run those, because I run those as well. I'm just saying that when it comes down to like when you're cutting, if you have to start cutting at the end of the game, because I usually start my decks off with like anywhere between 110 and 120 cards.
Yeah.
And then I play test, and then I see what's wrong with the 100 cards that I played, and then I go back to the pile, and then I swap out a couple cards. So, but we'll get into that in a second.
Yeah.
But essentially how it works, right?
I can't believe yours is that low. Mine's like 150 normally when I put a deck together.
The thing is I've been playing Magic for so long that now I have like the lines usually in my head of like what I need, and then also consistency. So Cody's played a bunch of my decks. A lot of my decks, I especially like. There's certain strategies that are just stronger with certain mechanics, right? So like Mono Green, a deck that he played on the show, does really, really well with big creatures.
Yep.
So if you're playing Mono Green big creatures, everything is your oyster. Everything that green does says yes, check the box.
Yeah.
And so it's the easiest way to build that strategy versus like Mono Red. Mono Red does really well with little creatures. Dragons also work really well in Mono Red, but
they work well late game.
You really have to like, if you're committing to dragons in mono red, you really have to like sell your majority of your early games. Your first like 6 turns are going to be committing to ramp.
And ramp in red is hard unless you're playing like, Seething Song into Geosurge. You're playing these ramp spells that are only good for that turn.
But that's the thing about red, right? So that's why I was saying you need your red blips. With red, all of your ramp packages for your stuff, you want it to make sure that you're hitting those blips. So sometimes I'll run the single use versus a mana rock if I need to, just because sometimes I need 6 blips right now so I can hit the 8-drop dragon that I want to drop.
Yeah.
Versus like having 3 or 4 colorless and that I've gotten 3 or 4 turns before. But so then you get, after your ramp package, you're going to card draw. So every card color also has its own restrictions and color profiles. So as you said, blue does it the best. Second best, I think, does it green now.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Though I think black 5 years ago was probably one of the strongest colors in Magic. It's still secretly sneaky better than green when it comes to card draw and when it comes to ramp. Mono black on its own, I think, pulls a lot of good synergies because they have some really, really, really niche things that are like exclusive to like, hey, if you're diehard playing a bunch of black pips, you're going to hit those markers that you need that you wouldn't normally be able to get.
They're the best at life gain. Like in pay, and they're the best at life gain.
I wouldn't say life gain because mono white is the best at life gain.
I think black is better at life gain than white. Just because like white does typically have life link more often with it. Black has effects that just do drain life and therefore you gain that life. And that's why I think that's better.
So I would say that draining life, black is obviously the best at. But the reason why draining life, because usually in black, you have to counteract the fact that you're draining yourself or draining other people for life.
And that's what I was...
So you do have that effect, but that's why aristocrats in black, like mono black aristocrats is probably one of the strongest strategies in black. Like we talked about, like mono blue artifacts is probably their strongest. Mono red like goblins, mono green elves. Mono black is, if you're playing like a strategy that I would argue is probably like low tier, like high power, it's mono black aristocrats because then
Blood Artist, Zulport Cutthroat, you're sacking a creature, draining everybody of life, gaining that life, and then you're going to use something like Colossus Citadel where you're just going to pay life and you're going to play the top card because you've gained so much extra life, which is why arguably I think one of the strongest cards like in Kingdoms that you can play in black, Exquisite Blood, because other people are getting hit on other turns, and you are benefiting from that. Now, granted, the other problem with that is if you play a card like that, you're going to get targeted then. Everyone's going to be like, oh, if I hit him, you gain that life.
Yeah.
So then you become a problem. So then you get targeted, and then you're going to get slugged hard.
And that's the problem with why I think Commander Damage was, we talked about this before too, why Commander Damage was originally created was because of that issue with life-gaining decks being so problematic.
Oh, 100%.
And yeah, if you're playing Exquisite Blood on the show, you're 100% if I'm playing a Voltron deck, I'm killing you first.
Oh, 100%.
Unless of course you're the king and I'm your knight, I'm murdering you.
Oh yeah.
And it just is what it is when it comes to that strategy of like how you play those types of decks. But I think when it comes to white, a lot of people sleep on mono white. I think that
I'm one of those guys that sleep on mono
well,
white.
see, the thing was I think mono white has its strengths when it comes. So if you're playing like low power, there's two strategies you go with mono white: auras or equipment.
Yeah.
Those are generally the strategies. Auras is the stronger option because auras are harder to get rid of. They do a little bit more advantage. You also don't have to pay equip costs. They're easier to come back from the graveyard. There's a lot of, they're harder to come back from the graveyard, but there's a lot of stuff that brings it back. But
they also blink a lot that get their ETB triggers that go off again, because white is really good at blinking as well.
The other thing that I would say that white's really, really good at, and this is kind of what I did when I built my mono white deck, mono white's really good at making tokens. And with a lot of the synergies that have come out recently, like my Benny Zoologist deck, I would play that deck and consistently win games. And the reason is because this goes into what we were talking about, card draw. So commanders that have card draw are generally considered stronger than other commanders. And the reason why is because anything that can give you, that you can pull from your command zone multiple times in a game to give you the value you need in order to get you there is great. And Benny was great at that because the fact that you can anytime anyone you created a token. So like you talked about Smothering Tithe, right? The bread and butter of mono white.
100%.
Every Smothering Tithe trigger that happened on everyone's turn, that was an additional card. And then whenever I play, like for example, I have a foods deck. When I play my foods deck, whenever I make an artifact, I also create, because I'm playing the partner pair.
Academy Manufacturer.
So no. So my commanders, Mary and Pippin.
Oh yeah.
So
okay.
Mary,
I was just thinking the Academy Manufacturer.
So one of them is like whenever you make play an artifact, you get to then make a dude. So then I'm like doubling up the triggers.
Yeah, it's
so
like having Wolverine riders, but you're getting extra value.
Yeah. So like when you're playing those like value based decks, like I think that's really like when you start getting into like the niche stuff. But like that's when we're talking about like aristocrats, like there's artifact synergies that do the same thing. Like red black does really great like treasure sacrifice, ping everyone for damage strategies. Great in normal games of Magic. Really difficult if it says each opponent.
Yes.
So you want the ones that say targeted because of the facts of how we play the game.
Because you don't want to take down your king, because that might be your deck synergy and you might be the knight. And if you're playing that and it's hitting the king's going to be like, well, this dude obviously is not my knight and he's going to kill you. And then you're going to be out the game and then your king's going to be flying solo, and that's just bad news.
Or
bears.
like if you're playing token strategy in red, then you play Perfroze because that's what everyone plays in red.
Yeah.
Right? And then you're just pinging 2 damage to each opponent. So what we're saying is that you don't always have to choose the CDH staples to build the decks, right? Commander's been around for so long now.
And there's like 15 million legal cards that you're allowed to use.
Yeah, and even within those 15 million legal cards or whatever Cody's saying, there's a bunch of commanders that don't ever see the light of day because of the fact that like you wouldn't be able to play them at your local table. And when it comes to commander and what we're looking to do on the show is we want to give those commanders a space to be able to play and interact with other people and really have fun and do stuff that you wouldn't normally be able to do at your local game store because you're like, well, that dude's going to play a combo deck. I really just wanted to play my spicy little dragons deck over here that isn't Dragon because that's the exception.
Miram is stronger.
Oh, well, Miram's gross too.
Miram's stronger than Dragon. I don't care what anyone says.
Yeah, making copies and it's in the right colors. But listen, regardless of what your strategy is, if you're just trying to play like a fun deck, watch our show. Tell us what you think. And, eventually what we're going to start doing is we're going to start doing, like in our local area, probably start doing tryouts for people who want to come play on the show.
Yeah.
Bring guests.
Always down for new friends.
Yeah, I think we'll start bringing on guests and letting people play and be a part of our community because, again, this is an open community and that's what we want to do.
Absolutely.
We'll see you guys next time on Resource Gatherer.